Burma, 1945. The jungle breathed heat like an open furnace, the kind that soaked into uniforms and lungs alike. Lanterns burned low across the Japanese field camp, casting long shadows over the rows of female auxiliaries summoned from their huts. Rain hammered the tin roofs, and yet the sound everyone heard most was a whisper. It started at the back of the line, passed from trembling lips to trembling ears. They order us to dance naked. The phrase moved like infection. No one dared speak louder than the rain. In the hierarchy of the Imperial Army, orders were sacred, absolute, unquestioned. But this one wasn't war. It wasn't duty. It was something that stripped even the illusion of purpose. Eiko Taekta, a 20-year-old nurse with mud still drying on her hands, looked to her left. Mariko, her bunkmate, mouthed the words again, as if hoping she'd misheard. But the officer's expression, rigid, sweating under his peaked cap, confirmed it. His voice broke as he repeated the command. The men are tired. Morale must not fall. Nobody moved. The silence that followed was louder than any gunfire Eiko had ever heard. Behind the officer, soldiers waited, faces blank, eyes averting what they had demanded. The power that once gave them pride now made them cowards. By late 1945, Japanese records estimated over 20,000 women serving in field support roles. Clerks, medics, typists, drivers. Many, like Eiko, were barely adults. They had joined to serve their emperor, not to be broken by their own commanders. One woman began to cry quietly, another clenched her fists until her nails drew blood. Eiko stared at the ground, heart pounding in her throat. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Desertion meant execution. Disobedience meant worse. The officer's voice cracked again. You will follow orders. Lightning split the sky, briefly turning every face white. The rain thickened, drumming like 1,000 heartbeats. Eiko closed her eyes, the sound merging into a dull roar. When she opened them again, the lantern beside her flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the camp whole, leaving only the echo of the command that would never fade. And in that darkness, dread began to breathe. The lanterns flickered again, halos of yellow fighting the blackness. The women still stood in formation, drenched and trembling, unsure if the storm outside or the one inside them was worse. The order hadn't changed. Dance, one word, simple, brutal, final. The officer in charge, a middle-aged sergeant named Tanaka, looked just as afraid as the women before him. His voice cracked with forced authority. You will obey. Show your loyalty. You will dance. Behind him, a row of soldiers pretended to look at the ground, ashamed to witness what discipline had become. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, one young nurse, her name lost to history, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she unbuttoned her jacket. Eiko couldn't breathe. Every part of her screamed to stop it, to grab her hand, to say no. But silence was the uniform they all wore now. Tanaka barked again, louder this time, all of you. The sound cut through the rain like a blade. Eiko's throat burned. Obedience had been her shield, now it became her prison. By 1945, the Japanese military code allowed execution for disobedience, even among auxiliaries. Loyalty above life was not a slogan, it was policy. Those who refused to perform disciplinary demonstrations risked being branded traitors, stripped of rank, and sent to penal squads where death was slow and unrecorded. The women began to move, hesitant, mechanical, faces blank. The rain plastered their hair to their faces, their steps uneven in the mud. There was no music, only the metallic rattle of rifles and the muffled sound of sobbing. The soldiers watched in silence, guilt burning like a fever. Tanaka turned away, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Smoke rose, thin and blue, curling into the rain like a ghost. This will not be remembered, he muttered under his breath, but it would be. Every drop of rain, every heartbeat, every stare became an unspoken record. Eiko's eyes locked on Mariko, whose tears mixed with the downpour. Their gazes met only once, long enough to say, "We are still human without words." Thunder cracked overhead, drowning the moment. When the lightning lit the camp again, it revealed what looked like a stage of mud and misery. And soon, that mud would become the only place left to stand. The rain stopped just before midnight, leaving the air heavy with steam and shame. The camp smelled of sweat, kerosene, and wet canvas. The women stood barefoot now, their boots sinking into a patch of churned mud that glistened under flashlight beams. That mud, once just ground, had become a stage. Around it, the men formed a loose circle, rifles slung low. Eyes hollow, nobody smiled, nobody looked up for long. The order was simple: dance. The purpose was cruel: break their spirit before the Allies could. Eiko felt her body move without her permission. The way it did during drills, mechanical, empty, trained into obedience. Her hands trembled at her sides. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered a prayer. The sound barely carried. Japanese military field records from late 1945 describe over 50 disciplinary demonstrations across retreating Yun, its moments where fear and fanaticism merged. These were not official punishments. They were collapses of order dressed as command, to remind the women of loyalty, one report claimed. But loyalty didn't look like this. It looked like surrender. The flashlights shook with the soldiers' hands. Mud stuck to every movement, turning the women's motions into jerks and slips. Every step echoed in the soaked earth like a drumbeat from nowhere. The sergeant who'd given the order turned away again, pretending to adjust his belt. He couldn't look. Eiko's breath came shallow, her heartbeat too loud. Her mind split into two, one half counting seconds to survive, the other memorizing every face that watched. This, she knew, was history no one would write. Mariko slipped in the mud, hitting her knees. Eiko reached to pull her up, but a soldier shouted, "Keep moving." The voice cracked mid-sentence. Even authority sounded sick now. The line between victim and perpetrator had blurred into rainwater and dirt. The moment stretched until even the jungle went quiet. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single defiant voice said no more. It was barely audible, but it cut through everything. Every head turned. Flashlights found her face, pale, soaked, unblinking. Eiko saw the soldier closest to her grip his rifle tighter. And in that instant, she knew, obedience was over. The flashlight beams locked on Eiko's face, catching the rain still dripping from her hair. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Around her, the circle of soldiers froze. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the insects seemed to fall silent. The Sergeant Tanaka lowered his cigarette, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" Eiko's voice trembled but didn't break. No more. The sentence hung there, heavier than the monsoon clouds above them. For a split second, it didn't sound like rebellion. It sounded like truth. But in the machinery of the Imperial Army, truth was treason. Tanaka's boots splashed forward. He struck her across the face with the back of his hand. She fell into the mud, the world spinning. The smell of iron filled her nose, blood and rain indistinguishable. "You shame the Emperor," he hissed. Eiko pushed herself up, hands sinking into the sludge. The other women looked away, not from disgust, but from the unbearable reflection of themselves. One soldier muttered, "Stop it, sir," too quietly to matter. Japanese field records list 17 disciplinary defiance cases among female personnel in 1945. 9 vanished after transfer. No explanation, no bodies recovered. What those reports don't describe is the look in Tanaka's eyes, not anger but terror. The kind of fear that comes when the system you enforce starts to rot in front of you. He shouted for guards. 2 men grabbed Eiko by the arms, dragging her toward the trucks. The mud clawed at her legs as if trying to hold her back. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just looked at Mariko, who stood frozen, tears streaking through the dirt on her cheeks. CARRIED, everything WORDS could. Apology, pride good. Bye. As they threw Eiko into the back of a truck, the engine roared to life. Rain began again, tapping on the metal roof like fingers on a coffin lid. Through the slats she saw the lanterns flickering, the stage shrinking behind her, and the shadows of her friends fading into the storm. The road ahead was black, endless, unmarked. She didn't know it yet, but this road would lead her straight into Allied hands, and into a captivity she never expected to survive. The truck jolted violently over rutted jungle roads, its headlights cutting weak tunnels through the rain. Inside the cargo bed, Aiko lay against cold metal, wrists bound with rough rope. The air reeked of diesel and fear. Every bump threw her against the side, bruising her ribs. Outside, thunder rolled like distant artillery, and every flash of lightning revealed the retreat collapsing in real-time, tanks abandoned, carts overturned, soldiers limping barefoot through mud. The convoy moved fast, too fast. They were running, not retreating. Rumors whispered between drivers. The Americans had cut through from the west, and British patrols were closing from the south. Aiko heard it, and almost laughed. Captivity sounded safer than command. Just before dawn, the rain stopped, and silence returned. Then came a sound more chilling than thunder, aircraft engines. The hum grew louder, multiplied, until it was everywhere. The first Allied fighter swooped low, its wings flashing silver against the pale sky. Someone screamed, enemy planes. The attack was instant. Machine gun fire tore through the lead truck. Flames erupted, bright and violent. Aiko felt the truck swerve, then slam sideways into a ditch. Metal screamed, bodies flew. She hit her head against the railing, stars exploding behind her eyes. The next second, she was crawling hands and knees through mud, smoke curling around her. Reports from Allied command confirmed 12 of 18 Japanese trucks destroyed in strafing runs along Burma's retreat roads that month. Survivors, mostly wounded nurses and clerks, were discovered scattered across the jungle within days. Aiko stumbled through bamboo thickets, following the distant sound of river water. Her uniform was halved, torn, her boots gone. The jungle hissed with life, crickets, birds, unseen things. She pressed a hand to a cut on her arm, blood mixing with rain. The Empire's banners had burned behind her. The world ahead was silent. By nightfall, she found a trail of boot prints and followed them until the beam of a flashlight caught her eyes. "Don't move," a voice shouted in English. Aiko froze, raising her hands. The soldiers that approached were not Japanese. They were British, helmets glinting under torchlight. Her capture wasn't a defeat. It was release. She collapsed into the mud, whispering the only English she knew. No soldier nurse. The nearest medic knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said. She didn't believe him. Not yet. When Aiko woke, she was wrapped in a blanket that didn't belong to her. The air smelled of disinfectant and diesel. A khaki tent rippled above her in the wind, its flaps tied open to a clearing drenched in pale sunlight. For a moment she thought she'd been taken back to her own field hospital until she heard English, calm, clipped and foreign. 2 British medics were speaking nearby. One looked barely older than she was. When he saw her stir, he smiled cautiously. "Water?" he asked, holding out a tin cup. Aiko hesitated, waiting for cruelty, but none came. The water was clean. The cup was cool. It was the first kindness she'd felt in months, and it terrified her. Around her, more captured Japanese troops lay on stretchers. Some men, some women. All wore the same expression, disbelief. They had been trained to expect torture. Instead, they were treated, bandaged, fed. It was almost unbearable. According to Allied POW logs, 94 Japanese women were processed in the Meiktila sector between August and September 1945, part of nearly 2,000 total prisoners captured during the Burma retreat. Most were classified as auxiliary medical corps, though many had never seen a hospital. Aiko watched as a Red Cross nurse gently changed the dressing on a Japanese clerk's leg. The patient flinched, not from pain, but from shock that a foreigner would touch her with care. "They called us ma'am." One survivor later recalled, "Our own officers never did." Eiko couldn't shake the thought. The enemy saw her humanity before her own army ever had. That night, she sat by the campfire with a few other women. The flames painted their faces amber, their silhouettes fragile but alive. Someone began to hum an old Kyoto lullaby, and the others joined softly, as if afraid to wake ghosts. The British guards didn't interrupt, they just listened. For the first time in months, Eiko didn't feel invisible. But beneath the warmth and smoke, her mind replayed the command that had ruined everything. They ordered us to dance naked. The words wouldn't fade. At sunrise, a soldier approached with a clipboard. Name, he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, Eiko Takeda. He nodded. Interrogation tomorrow. The word interrogation hit harder than any bullet she'd ever heard. The interrogation tent was quiet, too quiet. No shouting, no boots, no barked orders. Just the sound of rain dripping off the edges of canvas and the faint clink of a teacup being set down. Eiko sat stiffly on a wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap. Across from her sat a British officer in a neatly pressed uniform, his face unreadable. Beside him, an interpreter adjusted his spectacles and nodded politely. Miss Takeda. The interpreter began gently, We only want to understand. You are safe here. The word safe sounded foreign, almost absurd. Safety was for civilians, not for people who had survived both sides of a war. Eiko said nothing. The officer poured tea into 2 tin cups, one for himself, one for her. The gesture confused her. Tea had always been part of ritual and rank, never kindness. Minutes passed before she spoke. You want to know about camp? The interpreter translated. The officer nodded. Yes, everything you remember. She started slowly. Dates, ranks, supplies, the retreat routes, routine details. Then, without warning, her voice cracked. One night they ordered us to dance naked. The words fell out heavy, unstoppable. The interpreter froze mid-translation, his pencil hovering in the air. The British officer frowned. I'm sorry, what did she say? The interpreter swallowed. Sir, she says they were ordered to dance naked. Silence. The rain stopped outside, leaving only the sound of breath. The officer leaned back, eyes clouded with disbelief and disgust. By their own command? He asked. The interpreter nodded. Later, declassified Allied archives confirmed over 1,300 interrogations of Japanese female POW conducted in Burma and India through 1945. Most lasted less than an hour. Eiko's took nearly 3. When it ended, the officer closed his notebook and stood. Thank you, Miss Takeda, he said softly. He poured her another cup of tea before leaving. She didn't drink it. She just stared at the steam curling upward, disappearing into air that still smelled faintly of rain and ink. That night, as she returned to her cot, she kept replaying the officer's reaction. The way shock had turned to silence. For the first time, someone had listened, and that was somehow harder than the command itself. Tomorrow, that silence would travel up the chain of command and make its way into a file stamped urgent. 2 days later, a thin manila folder marked Takeda A arrived at the British field headquarters in Rangoon. The courier set it down on a cluttered desk already drowning in paper. Supply shortages, troop reports, surrender negotiations. But one line, scrawled in black ink near the top, made the clerk pause. Subject states, ordered to dance naked by superior officers. He read it twice, then passed it up the chain. Within hours, the report reached the intelligence room. Fans whirred overhead, pushing around humid air heavy with tobacco smoke. A group of officers gathered, frowning at the document as if it had insulted them personally. This can't be right, one muttered. Their own officers. Another replied, the Japanese code of discipline doesn't bend, it snaps. But the more they read, the quieter the room became. The interpreter's notes were clear, the handwriting unshaken. The event wasn't rumor. It was rot, spreading from inside the imperial structure itself. British intelligence files from late 1945 confirm a cluster of reports detailing morale collapse and sexual coercion within retreating Japanese units in Burma and Indochina. None were officially released, fearing propaganda backlash. Most were marked for internal circulation only. A major finally broke the silence. If we publish this, Tokyo will call it lies. The colonel beside him sighed, tapping the edge of the report. And if we bury it, history calls it silence. He looked up. File it under psychological breakdown, not war crime. That'll keep it clean. The decision was bureaucratic, not moral. The folder was stamped, logged, and shelved with thousands of others. Each one a small grave of truth. Meanwhile, in the POW camp, Eiko waited. She didn't know her testimony had become paperwork. She didn't know her pain had been rephrased into strategy language. When the interpreter visited days later, his voice was flat. Your statement has been received. They thank you for your cooperation. Cooperation, she repeated softly, the word tasting hollow. That night, she wrote one line in a scrap notebook. If silence is victory, we are conquered forever. But even silence has witnesses, and the first witness came with the next mail delivery, a Red Cross letter bearing her mother's handwriting. The next morning, the camp gate creaked open to the sound of an unfamiliar truck engine. Red Cross insignias gleamed on its doors, white against jungle green. The women gathered, squinting through the sunlight as nurses stepped out, arms full of soap, clean linen, and envelopes. Mail from home, hope in paper form. Eiko's hands trembled when her name was called. The nurse smiled as she handed her a small rain-stained letter sealed with Japanese postage. Eiko traced her mother's handwriting before opening it. Thin, shaky, familiar. Her throat tightened as she unfolded the page. My dear Eiko, it began, we heard your Yun. It was lost. The house is gone. Father too. The city is ash, but I am alive. If you live, live kindly. The words blurred as tears mixed with dirt on her face. She'd imagined reunion, not ruins. Around her, other women clutched their letters, some smiling through sobs, others collapsing silently. One girl whispered, our home turned to glass. Another said nothing, just tore the paper into tiny pieces and let the wind scatter them. By August 1945, Allied bombing had reduced 67 Japanese cities to rubble. Over 8 million civilians were displaced, many never returned. For the prisoners in the Burma camps, these letters were proof that the world they'd served had already vanished. Eiko folded her letter carefully and pressed it to her chest. The Red Cross nurse, an Australian named Margaret, knelt beside her, unsure what to say. Instead, she simply placed a hand on Eiko's shoulder. The warmth startled her. It had been months since anyone had touched her without violence or command. That night, Eiko sat by the dim glow of a lantern, rereading her mother's final line, if you live, live kindly. The sentence echoed against everything she'd endured, everything she'd obeyed. She took out a blank page from a supply ledger and began to write, not to command or confess, but to remember. She wrote about the night of the order, the lanterns, the mud, the shame, the silence. She didn't know it then, but that page would become part of something larger. A diary that would outlive her and the war itself. And once ink touched that paper, she could never go back to silence again. The camp lights dimmed early that night. A humid stillness clung to everything, the air, the blankets, the unspoken memories. Eiko waited until the guard's footsteps faded, then pulled out the scrap of paper she'd hidden under her coat. The letter from her mother lay beside it, the only piece of home she had left. The stub of a pencil shook in her fingers. She began to write, not like a soldier filing a report, but like someone stitching the torn edges of her mind together. They ordered us to dance naked. She wrote first, pressing the words deep into the paper as if carving them into stone. We obeyed because death wore the same uniform as command. The sentences came slow at first, then faster memories she hadn't dared speak aloud. She wrote names, dates, the sound of rain, the smell of fear. Her words weren't meant for revenge. They were a record for anyone who might one day ask, how could this happen? Across the world, archivists would later uncover only 3 surviving diaries written by Japanese female POW. Each was a whisper that somehow escaped the machine of censorship and shame. Aiko's would have been the 4th if it hadn't been found. A guard's boots crunched outside. She froze, holding her breath. The lantern flickered, and her shadow danced against the canvas wall like a ghost reenacting its own trauma. The guard passed. She exhaled slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs like artillery fire. By dawn, the page was full. Her handwriting had changed stronger, sharper. She tucked the paper into a folded bandage packet and hid it beneath her medical kit. For the first time since the war began, Aiko felt like she owned her story. At breakfast, Mariko saw the faint ink stains on her fingertips and whispered, "You're writing." Aiko nodded once. Someone must. That day, as they distributed supplies under the watch of tired British guards, Aiko kept glancing toward the tent where she'd hidden her words. What she didn't see was a shadow standing at its entrance, a guard, curious, watching her too long. By nightfall, her secret would no longer be hers. They came for her journal at dawn. 2 guards entered without warning, their boots muddy from the rain. One overturned her cot. The other rummaged through her medical kit until a folded bandage packet slid to the ground. Inside the page, the handwriting, her truth. Aiko lunged for it instinctively, but the younger guard held her back. His grip wasn't cruel, just firm, mechanical. "Orders," he muttered. The paper was passed to a British officer, who turned it over carefully, his expression tightening as he read the first line aloud. "They ordered us to dance naked." He stopped halfway through, swallowing hard. The document was sealed within the hour, labeled Evidence Female POW Testimony, Burma Sector D. Then it disappeared into a wooden crate already filled with maps, medical logs, and reports, a file among thousands. A life reduced to a reference number. Post-war records reveal that over 400,000 Japanese military documents, interrogation notes, diaries, testimonies were microfilmed by Allied forces before being shipped to London and Washington. Most were never opened again. Some were later returned to Japan. Many were lost. An Indian interpreter named Patel, the same man who had once translated Aiko's first interrogation, stood by the truck as the crates were loaded. "This one," he whispered to the clerk, "isn't just evidence, it's confession." The clerk shrugged. "We just move boxes." The lid shut with a dull thud, and the nails went in hammer strikes that sounded final. Inside the tent, Aiko sat in silence, staring at her empty cot. She wasn't angry, she was hollow. The words she'd bled onto paper were now locked behind padlocks and paperwork. For the first time, she realized history could steal as efficiently as war. That night, she walked to the fence. Beyond it, jungle crickets sang in a rhythm that almost sounded like home. Will they ever read it? Mariko asked softly behind her. Aiko didn't turn around. Maybe not. She said, "But it exists. That's enough." Far away in a warehouse lined with dust and crates, her testimony sat in the dark, ink drying, waiting for someone decades later to open it again. And that someone would. Tokyo, decades later. Fluorescent lights hum over glass cases in a small war museum tucked between office towers. Visitors drift through silently, stopping to stare at relics that survived when people didn't: canteens, maps, uniforms eaten by rust. In one corner, a new display plays a grainy audio tape labeled Testimony, Female POW, Burma Sector D. A young curator adjusts the speaker, and a faint hiss fills the air. Then, through the static, comes a fragile voice. Slow, clear, unmistakably human. "They ordered us to dance naked." The crowd stiffens. The room shrinks around her words. It's Aiko, decades older, frail but deliberate. The recording, restored from microfilm archives, declassified in 1977, was discovered among forgotten Allied files. Out of over 20,000 global POW testimonies digitized by the 2000s, hers is one of fewer than 20 from Japanese women. Her voice cracks only once. "We thought we were serving our country, but we were serving fear. It took me 40 years to stop hearing the order. The audience doesn't move. The tape whirs softly, every breath of hers preserved like evidence against oblivion. On the wall behind the display hangs a black and white photo, young women standing in the rain under lanterns, eyes wide with obedience and disbelief. Next to it, a single caption reads, Burma, 1945. Photographer unknown. Among the visitors is an old man with trembling hands. Patel, the former interpreter. He closes his eyes as her voice plays, remembering the girl in the tent clutching her teacup. She was the bravest one, he murmurs, too softly for anyone to hear. Outside, schoolchildren press their faces against the glass, whispering questions their teachers can't quite answer. Aiko's story isn't heroic, but it's true, and truth, finally, is what survives. The recording ends with a click. For a moment, only the city noise leaks through the museum walls, traffic, footsteps, rain. Then the curator presses play again. Aiko's voice returns, smaller this time but clearer, like it's speaking directly to whoever will listen next. Memory isn't revenge, it's resistance. The tape spins once more, hissing, steady, alive, and somewhere through the static of history, she's still dancing this time, by choice.